Hey guys, and welcome back to this month's GPU Crisis Update, the series where we cover some of the most important topics that are going to affect GPU stock and availability, so that you have a better idea of what your chances are when it comes to buying a GPU this month. So this is the month of March, and we've been doing this every month since July. So if you want to see the historical climate of the GPU market, as well as some fun videos mixed in there, I'll leave the full playlist in the video description for you. Definitely check that out. But this month, we're going to be talking about some recent news that could have a positive or negative impact on GPU pricing and availability, including troublesome news when it comes to Intel ARC performance and stability issues, a much deeper look and essential clarity as to how the Russia-Ukraine situation could impact supply chains, cryptocurrencies, and the GPU shortage, and finally, why it's currently the worst time to be a crypto miner in the last 14 months, and how we are seeing the benefits of it. Then we're going to have a look at some new and improved GPU used market data and how prices for GPUs have continued to decline, which will allow us to assess how high demand is and see if this is a month of the GPU. Let me explain. So for our first news topic, we're taking a look at some updates for Intel's ARC GPUs, as earlier information set the card for release in Q1 2022. That is this month, latest. But many people were rightfully concerned at the fact that we're not seeing the same level of leaks and pricing that we typically do, at least leading up to a time frame like this. There's a major reason for that. Red Gaming Tech, a prominent and well-established GPU leaker, said that his sources are mainly citing software and driver issues, constantly crashing with horrible performance in DX11 games. As for the hardware, this isn't perfect yet either, and apparently Intel are trying to fix problems with the voltage frequency curve that's causing much higher than expected power and heat output. Following on with a release timeline, expecting the laptop variant to come out a bit sooner, but the high-end desktop card could be pushed back to about Q3 or Q4. Now, Intel are currently saying Q2, but if it is Q4, this would be a terrible situation for Intel to be in, as RTX 4000 and RX 7000 is set to release also at the end of the year or beginning of next. And if those cards' performance numbers are to be believed, that could make Intel's GPU pretty much obsolete before it's even available. But speaking of performance targets, Intel have also scaled these back too, from aiming for about 3070 Ti level performance now to about 3070, which is exactly what I thought would happen when 3070 Ti performance was being reported. Nevertheless, at the end of the day, most people are going to be happy with that level of performance. It's the price, availability, and stability that's going to be arguably more important. And now it's time for a deep topic that I originally didn't want to include. So for our second news story, a deep and heartbreaking one. Russia attacking Ukraine is obviously a truly tragic topic with a tremendous impact to individuals and the world as a whole, almost immeasurably bigger than anything else we typically cover in this series. And to be honest, I'm almost embarrassed to talk about it in the context of the GPU shortage, as it feels pretty inconsequential given what's happening. But realistically, there are many relevant parts that you should understand in the context of what we discuss here. So I want to preface this topic with the fact that my heart goes out to everybody who is affected during this time. I've reached out to my friends that are undoubtedly affected by this to make sure that they and their families are safe, and I urge you to do the same, to reach out and offer any assistance you can during this time. But unpacking this whole situation in the context of the semiconductor and more specifically the GPU shortage, there's two main areas that are inevitably going to be affected: global economics, including cryptocurrency, and the supply chain. So let's start with supply chain. The three main raw materials that come from that region used in semiconductor manufacturing are neon, C4F6, and palladium, which, given the current circumstances of bans and people, fighting for their lives, are likely going to be impacted in terms of extraction, production, and transportation, creating another supply chain issue for chip manufacturing. So the question is, are relevant companies affected by this, and what is the plan for minimizing the impact? Well, Ukraine is a significant supplier of semiconductor-grade neon, critical for lasers used in chip making, and in the context of this specific Ukrainian neon, it's a byproduct of Russian steel manufacturing, purified in Ukraine, as stated by market research TechSet. So this is obviously going to be affected with the current situation. Additionally, Russia is a top global producer of palladium used in sensors and memory. But the question is, how affected are the companies that need these raw materials to make what goes into a GPU? Well, the general consensus with regards to statements from TSMC, Samsung, Micron, SK Hynix, Intel, GlobalFoundries is there's no immediate issue, such as in an interview with Reuters, TSMC's Vice Premier Shenjon Chin stated Taiwanese chip makers use little palladium in manufacturing, and that neither Russia Russia or Ukraine are a major source for them specifically. Additionally, both Neon and C4F6 supply chains are diversified, and they don't see a big near-term impact on manufacturing because of this. So ultimately, it seems that these companies have stockpiles and alternative suppliers for these materials, and many historical factors were highlighted as causes for them to diversify their supply chains. The US-China trade war, the pandemic, and even the Russian annexation of Crimea back in 2014, which triggered a jump in neon prices. So this puts them in a good position to handle a situation like this. Although it is worth remembering that these are press statements from these companies, and they'll be very conscious of their stock prices and not wanting to cause mass hysteria. So then the thing to do is to scratch a level deeper and see if we can cut through the executive talk, which apparently we can. Taiwan's Ministry of Economic Affairs states that it's checked Taiwan's semiconductor supply chain and found no direct impact on materials or production activities. But just because there's an alternative supplier doesn't mean that there's not going to be an impact, especially when it comes to prices. As a best case scenario, these other suppliers will have to meet the supply deficit caused by the inability to obtain these materials from Russia and Ukraine. And while trying to meet demand, prices for these are likely going to be a big factor for their markets, and the cost will inevitably be trickled down to the consumer. And as a worst case scenario, there are many components of a graphics card that are not just the memory and the GPU die itself. And if sensors, regulators, and the production of other SMDs are affected, all things necessary for turning a GPU core into a finished graphics card, this could have a knock-on impact with a situation like plenty of production from TSMC and Samsung, who make Nvidia and AMD GPU cores, but no ability for companies like Asus, ASRock, MSI to actually build the graphics card because they can't get the other components. So at the moment, there's no impact in terms of manufacturing. Nevertheless, I will absolutely be keeping an eye on this for you. But in terms of financial markets, including cryptocurrency, this tells a different story. Countries have continued to limit Russia's banking access, and Western allies have followed suit, such as swift expelling Russian banks, making it more difficult to move money in and out of the country. Because of this, we could very well see an increase in value of many cryptocurrencies for a couple key reasons. Reason number one is they could be used as a tool for the untraceable movement of money, and if large sums of any cryptocurrency are being bought, the price will go up dramatically. That's just inevitable. Additionally, decentralization as a key feature is going to have even more appeal for anyone looking at this situation, and could mean many more investors focusing on crypto as a more stable solution compared to what we see as the economic impact of war unfolds. I do want to make clear that I'm not saying any of these actions against Russian banks and targeting their economy is bad in the context of what's happening in Ukraine right now, or that the negatives here outweigh any decisions at a higher level. I know literally nothing about running a country or a banking institution, but I do have experience in the GPU and crypto market. Not only were we accurately reporting difficulty during the worst times, but we were also one of the first places to report on recent declining price trends months ago, which you can see for yourself. But even though that news isn't particularly uplifting for gamers, miners, or the world as a whole, there is good news for gamers, as it's currently the worst time to be a miner in like the last 14 months. So for our third news topic, before we take a look at the GPU pricing data, comes from the fact that February became the worst time to mine Ethereum in the last 14 months, which is amazing news for gamers. So let me show you the data and how it's been collected. So here is my spreadsheet where I've collected two specific data points over the past 4 and a bit years to generate a profitability value graphed right here. The data points that we started with are the price of Ethereum at market close and Ethereum network difficulty as per Etherscan. So I'm sure you all know what the US dollar value of Ethereum means, but when it comes to mining difficulty, this is a calculation based on the hash power of the network. Essentially, every device mining Ethereum with an Ethereum coin payout adjustment based on the network's current performance, known as the difficulty bomb. Ultimately, what that means is that difficulty isn't linear with the mining capability of the network and gets increasingly more difficult with performance. But with those two data points, this gives us this graph, with the profitability per day represented by this blue line graph and the average profitability for the month in orange. Interestingly, the least profitable day to mine Ethereum recently was back on January 22nd, with a profitability metric of just over 0.191. However, January averaged out at just under 0.49. February, on the other hand, didn't have a single day lower than January's lowest, but the average for February did settle in at just under 0.225, meaning that last month had about 10% lower profitability compared to the month before. And the last time Ethereum had a profitability level lower than this was December 2020, 14 months ago. And as you can see by this trend of the orange month-to-month average, it's been declining since November. Now what that means is that as Ethereum becomes less profitable, it's going to be less worthwhile for miners to mine it. And the knock-on effect of that is that many miners will not only be less likely to buy GPUs, increasing your chances of purchasing one new, but also look to recoup their investments by selling graphics cards on the used market, driving prices lower and lower, which is exactly what we saw in our recent GPU scalper investigation, where we dove deep into the used market data, including how many millions of dollars scalpers have collectively made. I'll leave that video in the description and the comment section for you to check out. It's both terrifying and extremely insightful. But there are even more news topics that I do want to cover briefly at the end of this video, so stay tuned for that. But news topics aren't the only source of information, and sometimes they aren't even the most important when it comes to the here and now. So you're going to want to know how the used markets have been reacting in real time, and what your chances are when it comes to buying a GPU this month. So it's time to take a look at our crypto and used market pricing data, as these will directly impact your ability to buy a GPU. Because remember, if GPUs become less valuable to mine on, they'll become easier to source, both used or new from official retailers, because of lower competition. So let's take a look at that now. So let's start by briefly taking a look at what Bitcoin and Ethereum pricing has been doing over the past month. And forewarning, it's not as promising for gamers as it has been recently. So Bitcoin, $43,832.80. That is a big increase compared to what we've seen recently. An increase compared to last month of $6,972.19, or 18.92%. Now, it did have a big increase as of the 27th, and that's actually quite an important day for the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So that's not a good indication of things to come. But it is still looking positive when compared to, say, 6 months, a year. At its highest was like 67,500, so 43.8 is still very good compared to that. And when it comes to Ethereum, currently at $2,946.21. That is an increase of just under 10%, or $263.83, compared to a month ago. Again, as of February 27th, it started increasing. Nevertheless, it is still looking good compared to early to mid-November, where it was at its peak at nearly $5,000. So the next thing that we typically look at in this series is TechSpot's used market data right here. But we're actually going to largely ignore this now, as we're going to use something else moving forward. Something even better. This is part of my GPU used market data from my recent GPU scalper investigation video. The difference between this and TechSpot's data is theirs only takes the average of the 3rd week of sales in a given month, whereas the data I have here is every single sale that month. Thus, it's a better representation of the month's average. There's also a lot more data for every single card, going back to the beginning of last year, which gives us much more historical information. All of the graphics cards, every current generation GPU from AMD and Nvidia, are down at the bottom there, and we have the pricing for them on the left-hand side. Now, what we can do is, if we go here and apply that, you'll see that 2 line graphs are now being overlaid on top of that bar graph, and they represent the daily market close price for both Bitcoin in pink and Ethereum in green, with the value of Bitcoin being represented on the right-hand axis and the value of all GPUs as well as Ethereum on the left-hand side. I know this does seem a little bit overwhelming, but I'll explain it, and it is actually really quite simple. Ethereum and Bitcoin are stacked like this, you'll see here. So an easier way to show you this, take off Bitcoin to move it out the way. So here's a good representation of it. In May, right here, these are all the plot points for May, and every value Ethereum has been within that month. So right here would be the highest point, $4,104.21 on the 12th. And its lowest point on the 23rd. And right here will be the 1st, you see there, and right here will be the last day. There we go, the 31st, which then brings us into the 1st day of June, and then the cycle continues again. So although it looks really complicated, it's actually quite simple and an easier way to show you that data in a long time period. This is like thousands of data points right here. So going back to the data, comparing from last month to this month, Nvidia graphics cards have dropped on average 12%, 11.97 to be exact. That's for RTX 3000 series GPUs. As for RX 7000 series GPUs, 8.05%. That is a huge amount. This is such fantastic news, and I can't wait for it to drop further and further. So there is another data point that we look at, and although we've upgraded from TechSpot's data, I do still find it interesting. It is the cheapest RTX 3080 on eBay right now, DX 3080. right here. So last month it was $1,295.05 including shipping, and that was a huge reduction compared to anything that we had seen. Usually from Russian Federation is a red flag. This is parts only, which means that this one is the cheapest one. Double check that this isn't a scammy listing. So $45.05 isn't as much as last month. That was a huge drop that I just didn't expect. But it's not inconsequential. And if more and more people are trying to compete at these lower and lower prices, that's how the market works. Prices will come further and further down. But one thing that I need to cover with you guys is there were quite a few noteworthy topics this month. So what I'm going to do is speedily go through them now and make sure that you have a full understanding of the month's events and what we can expect moving forward, and summarize what we've learned today. Because yes, it looks really good and prices are absolutely going in the right direction, but I am concerned. So conclusion speed topic number 1. Nvidia's light hash rate limiter implemented to reduce Ethereum mining performance has been fully unlocked. Only kidding, apparently everybody just downloaded a ton of viruses. But the fact that this isn't true is great news, because if it was, it would mean that light hash rate cards would have the same value to miners as non-light hash rate cards, and would increase their worth significantly and trigger prices to go back up. Best Buy now requires you to buy a $200 total tech membership to even afford the opportunity to purchase a GPU, which is a disgusting way to do business, and no, you don't get your money back if you still can't buy one. The only thing I hope is that Best Buy are doing this because they think stocking GPUs will soon be a non-issue, and that they're trying to boost their profits as much as they can before it's too late. But this month is kind of a conflicting month for me. Although it does look really good on the surface, I mean, we're seeing double-digit percentage price drops pretty much across the board, which is exactly what we're expecting in last month's GPU crisis update. But there is a very potent reason why this could all change very soon. The fact that Russia is continuing to attack Ukraine. Obviously, you should be keeping an eye on this for far more important reasons than this, but in the context of what we talk about, if crypto bounces back because of the reasons that we discussed today, it's going to be one of the biggest factors impacting GPU stock and pricing. So I truthfully need to tell you that we may see the opposite in the coming months, especially if what happens in Ukraine doesn't stop and people gain more faith in cryptocurrency because of it. I hope I'm wrong, and things can always change, but this is part of the open and honest information that I give you guys. So thank you very much for watching, and if you're new here, you know what to do. Get subscribed, turn on notifications, or at least check out another video before you decide. I have some recents in the video description and comment section for you. Otherwise guys, a like is always appreciated, and stay strong, Ukraine.